I had given myself 3 days to make the game Flammable Freddy. By the start of the second, I had a fully functional level, but it lacked any long-term gameplay or reward. It just felt a bit too hectic. You are, after all, a man on fire with 20 seconds to live. And I got inspiration from the most unlikely of places. When I was 13 years old, Tommy TTK and myself entered a Christmas competition, and we made a Tekken-style fighting game called Christmas Combat. And on the final day, I decided it wasn't up to snuff and quickly added an equipment unlocking mechanic, whereby you could replay matches to grind for better stuff to help you in the fights to come. And I think that saved the project, because it gave you a higher purpose than simply to get onto the next level. It added replayability. So I decided to add upgrades to this game as well. Stuff like increasing your flammability, the range of your fire, and your running speed. And I got divine inspiration in the form of a vision of a man wearing a cap with a flaming whip attached to it, which he could flail about in a circle to ignite stuff around him. That idea was the driving force behind this mechanic. Much like imagining my player falling off a cliff was the reason behind adding islands on day one. But adding a grinding mechanic is dangerous. I don't want to tire people out by forcing them to endlessly replay the game until they reach a set number of points. So I made it so that the points didn't accumulate. You get a high score, you unlock stuff with that high score, and then you use the things you've just unlocked to get a better high score. Repeat until you've beaten the game. This made it skillful, since you only need to play the game through like 2 or 3 times to unlock everything if you're good enough at it. We've all played games with high scores. But who cares about these? Do you ever feel inclined to replay a game simply to beat your high score in an offline game? Probably not. It's meaningless, unless you get rewarded for doing so, or if there's a multiplayer aspect to it. So that's why I made the high scores in this game give you unlocks, and why, once you reached a score I deemed to be good enough, the game could be ended. That's right, score enough and you unlock an upgrade that lets you become a diamond. Because at some point in our lives, we've all wanted to be made of diamonds, haven't we? Ending it like this might be a bit too much like something somebody like James Luke would do, but it didn't matter what the end was, it just mattered that I added an end of some sort. Because some people, myself included, prefer to have an end goal to aim for. It serves as the reason to play the game in the first place, and as the good excuse to stop playing it once it's been reached. I added further replayability in the form of bonus objectives. If you could beat the game in a short enough time, or a long enough time, or could burn all of a certain type of object, it would give you permanent bonus points, which would forever bolster the high scores you achieve through playing the game normally. I was really happy with how this turned out, because these bonuses would give less talented players a chance to still beat the game, and even as somebody more skilled, I appreciated these bonuses because they keep the gameplay fresh. Suddenly, instead of the game being all about causing as much destruction as possible, it becomes about beating the levels as quickly as possible, or about lasting for as long as you can, playing chicken with death. I especially like the one requiring that I get exactly 9,050 points. It's the hardest and most infuriating achievement of the lot, but perhaps because of that, it's also the most rewarding one once you finally get it. I guess you could see these bonus objectives as being like achievements in Steam. It's an easy way of adding a huge amount of extra gameplay and replayability for those who want an extra reason to play the game. And all these unlocks did the trick. The moment they were implemented, Flammable Freddy went from being a 20-second gimmick into being a game worth replaying several times. And a wave of excitement swept over me. When I played this game on the first night, it had felt like such a disappointment, and I hadn't been able to see a way for it to improve. But now, simply thanks to the inclusion of these unlockable upgrades, the possibilities were suddenly stretching out in front of me, and I was excited to begin playtesting it again, to balance all of its mechanics and upgrades, and to get the unlocking progression to be challenging yet satisfying. I wish I had this much motivation to work on Destruction Darius too. What I'm about to say next is the most valuable advice you'll hear from this series. You must always aim for less than you'd like. Making a game for a deadline is not about cramming as much into the game as you can. It's about compromise and sacrifice, and in tailoring the project to the length of time you've allocated for it. Yes, on day one I'm rushing to make as much stuff for it as I can, but there's a strict cutoff where I go from adding more to just polishing what's already there. But it's hard for people to do this, especially when you're stuck in the mindset that more is better. I think it's why younger people are so rubbish at competitions, because they enjoy them too much. For them, it's not about making a game, it's about chasing a feeling, about making the next big thing. They get too enthusiastic, they add too much, and forget to playtest what's already there. Now I have become old and boring, and I'm now happy to finalise the game's content long before the deadline approaches. A good rule of thumb I found is to get the game done by halfway through the time you've allocated for it, and to dedicate the second half of the project to playtesting and polishing what's already there. And that's what I did. Halfway through day 2, I stopped adding stuff and simply began replaying what was there, over and over and over and over and over again. 15 years ago, I'd have done this about half an hour before the deadline, and I'd inevitably find countless game-breaking bugs, but it would then be too late for me to do anything about it. I'd submit the game in a broken state, hating myself for not having fixed those things sooner. I'd eventually get those things fixed in my own time, but since the deadline had already passed, no one would be around to ever play the working version of my game. Well, I wasn't going to risk that this time. In this time, the sort of stuff I'm doing is to iron out the obvious bugs, but also to get a feel for what this game's like to play, and to make adjustments accordingly. Small stuff that you can't plan for in advance, no matter how hard you try. Stuff like deciding that the oil drums shouldn't be solid objects because it interferes with your movement, but then because of that, your player runs straight through them, which looks wrong. So you boost the player up by a few pixels to make it look as though he stood on top of the barrel. But then because you've done that, he no longer ignites the oil on the floor when in this state. Which might be realistic, but isn't fun when playing the game, so you make an exception in this state where he'll still burn oil even when hovering some way above it. But then you find it takes too long to ignite a tipped over oil drum because the oil that spills out starts some way away from the barrel, and might not be triggered when you're stood on top of the oil drum that you're trying to destroy. So you create an oil patch directly beneath the oil drums once they've been tipped over to aid in their destruction. That's just one example of the many adventures that I go on when playtesting the game. And you can't prepare for these small details in advance, you just have to give yourself time to discover them, and then to fix them. And people take this stuff for granted. Had I not told you about this oil drum story, you probably would never have noticed any of it in game. But had I not made these adjustments, then interacting with and igniting these oil drums would have felt a little more frustrating as a result. So I want to challenge the notion that doing stuff properly saves time in the long run, because from my experience it just means you take longer to reach the stage where you discover you need to change everything. So over time, my approach to making games has transitioned from doing everything right first time around to taking a more reactionary approach to things, and by putting more emphasis on having as much time to playtest my games as I can. You're going to have to do this to your own games, no matter how robustly you think it's been built. Bow before my method of rushing through and botching the game's mechanics to completion. Then by botching them even more when I go about polishing and balancing the botched systems that I've implemented in the first place. My game's code is messy. I will be limping across the finish line with everything held together with duct tape. But a player of the game won't ever know that, because as messy as its innards are, on the surface my game will work almost flawlessly. For the time I've invested into it, it will have more advanced gameplay systems than it should have, and it'll operate annoyingly well, and with more balance than a game about spontaneous combustion has any right to. I remember another game that I worked on called Santasatnas. This was a game that Tommy TTK and I made when we were 18. It was like Final Fantasy, and Tom spent a month making the world map, and I spent a month doing the battle screen. Both halves of this game were heavily polished and playtested, but we left it till the last minute to combine the two halves together, and so the game was submitted for the competition without even having been played through once. A fatal mistake. Game making is all about the playtesting. No matter how well you think you've made the game, you're no doubt going to find huge, glaring bugs in your creation for at least the first 3 or 4 playthroughs. That's why I'm fine with botching the whole thing in the first place, in exchange for freeing up more time later for the most valuable, playtesting stage of the project. Reaching the end of a game in a single playthrough without anything going terribly wrong is a momentous occasion for me, and it's something that's only achievable after dozens of failed or broken attempts. Looking back at Santasatnas, it's honestly a miracle that it worked as well as it did. Sure, the levelling up was unbalanced, and progress through the game was painfully slow, but the monsters scaled surprisingly well for the level that your characters would be in each area, and all this gave a real personality to each island of the game, that neither of us had known about, given that we had just been working on our half of the game blind from the other. I think there was a glitch in the final cutscene where the game refused to jump to the end boss battle, so Santa and his brother were just left stood there staring at each other forever. But I don't think the judges ever even got close to finishing the game, given how slow-paced the whole thing was. Something that would have become immediately evident had we actually playtested the whole thing in its entirety. But I've learned from that, and the games I make are infinitely better as a result. Because they're actually games instead of just being half-finished tech demos. Speaking of half-finished, I realise I'm only halfway through the script for this second day of development. So I'll save all the talk of graphics, audio and homoerotic desires for the next chapter of this series.